Our speaker today is Patricia Wigney, who's the executive director of Bridgeway House. Bridgeway House is a facility, it's more of a group of programs that provide treatment, developmental therapies, enrichment courses, and support to children and families affected by autism. She was brought to this work by her son, and she's going to tell us all she's been doing and what Bridgeway House does. So, Patricia, please welcome her.
This comes off? I think, okay, that will be better because I'm short and not everybody can see me when I talk.
There you go.
Okay. Good morning, evening, afternoon. I think it's afternoon. Welcome to the World of Autism. Thank you for having me here today. It's a great honor to be asked to speak in front of so many people that I have the greatest amount of respect for in our community today. Nancy was kind enough to ask me to come, and what an honor to be a guest here. When she first called, she asked me a couple questions, and one of those questions was, what was the topic of my presentation? I have to say, sometimes when I come and give a talk, I really, very rarely do I prepare. It really comes from my heart, because I see you, and sometimes the people that I'm speaking to, it's really important that I'm really directing my presentation or my talk to you. So I'm really, again, honored to be here. And the topic was, what is autism? And that's a wow. In my world, that's a big wow, because that's a big topic. First of all, let me give you a little more detail about Bridgeway House. We serve about 800 families in some capacity a week, whether it be services, indirect services, referrals, or crisis, or just our regular programming. We have many different programs. One that is most heard about, which is our autism school. We serve 60 students from districts all over Lane County and beyond. We have 2 from Lynn Benton, we have 1 from Salusla, and 1 from Douglas County. So it well goes beyond our county that's affected by placements for students that are in great need of support. Our other programs, which is the home therapy and home tutoring program, they are the heart and soul of the work we do. They are the foundation of what we do, and where our core work and support comes from. And we now are fortunate enough to be able to, really thanks to the Affordable Care Act, be able to provide different services that weren't available 22 years ago when I was looking for my daughter and how to support her. So the other programs we have are social groups. And as we'll get into talking, I'll let you know about the different areas where children with autism are affected by their spectrum disorder, and why we have social groups, or why we have speech, or OT, or special autism school. I would like to ask for all those that know or love somebody with autism to raise your hand, and keep it held. It's important. Look at the numbers around you of people that have their hands up. There's somebody in almost every table. It's pretty much how it is in our community and the world. There's nationwide, it's 1 out of 68 children being diagnosed. Those numbers are, according to the CDC, those numbers are greater than the polio epidemic ever was, greater than AIDS, greater than any other health or disability that's out there right now. According to the CDC, a parent survey, the numbers are 1 out of 45, which means, yes, those numbers are growing. And there's multiple reasons why those numbers are growing. 1, we know more, better servicing, better diagnosing, and they made the spectrum a little bit wider. Many years ago, probably 40 years ago, it was 1 out of 10,000 that was being diagnosed with autism. So those numbers have really, really grown. And autism is a spectrum disorder. It's a continuum. With that spectrum, it can contain or have multiple diagnoses with it. There could be ADHD, bipolar, schizophrenia. It's all a continuum. So that's partly why the numbers are so high. In Lane County, the educational diagnosis is about 1 out of 42, meaning that out of the students in public school that are registered and on IEPs, it's a loose number, but it's about 1 out of 42. That doesn't even encompass the children that go to a private school or are not on an IEP. And an IEP is an individual education plan for any child with any disability that the public schools are trying to serve. Back in, 1996, I was fortunate to give birth to my 4th child. Her name is Jofika. It wasn't always Jofika. It's Sophia Marie. But because of autism, she's Jofika. And we're not going to change that name. We're not going to mess with it because that's the way my life is, and that's the way many of our families are. Jofika had an infatuation for being Hungarian. I'm not Hungarian. And neither was my husband, but she is. And she can be called Jofika, which translates into Little Sophia. When she was young, if I called her patella or whatever interest she was in at the time, I was spleen, Papa was kidney, she was into the human body, I could go anywhere and be kind of like a normal mom. But I'd have to say, hey, patella, come here. Patella, do this. I had to keep saying the word patella. That's the key. This changed about every year. We had a new special interest. If she read a book, I had to call her by that name, cat wings. What happens? If she's a bird, she might migrate and leave to Canada. Finally, about 7 years old, 8 years old, we actually went to Hungary and got involved in the Hungarian culture. There they all called her Jofika. She turned to my husband and I and one day said, you can call me Jofika if you want. And we looked at each other. We thought, oh heck, it's human and it still means her name. We will do it. We made a deal. And now at almost 22 years old, Jofika is at the University of Oregon, started off in Clark-Sarner College, and she's a senior now and doing really well. Does she still have autism? Yes. Is the advocacy and the challenges of autism still there? Yes. Back in 1996, we moved forward. There's this wonderful organization in town called EC Cares. You could have free services for your child because it was state funded by the government, right? They had government grants. So you could get a limited amount of services. But if you go to any practitioner, they're going to tell you that your child needs behavior therapy. What is that? Where was that 20 years ago? There was one foundation in town that was a private foundation called the Maria Foundation. Very difficult to get in. I was on the wait list, but they only had 3 clients. And that, of course, was started by an amazing mom that wanted services for her child. So you took the services from EC Cares. DDS, which is Developmental Disabilities, which, thanks to the Affordable Care Act, is now funded appropriately to serve children with disabilities. Back then, all based on parents' income, you were only eligible if you made less than $10,000. Well, that was very hard to live on. And if you made less than $10,000, you might get a Century Vest, or they'll pay for a week of camp. but it was very minimal support. Where do you get this therapy that everywhere I go, every conference I went to told me I need it for my child so that she could grow up and be part of our community and go to college or get a job? Where do I get those services in Lane County? Honestly, there wasn't any. And there were parents like me in my position that didn't make enough to provide for our own programs, or didn't make small amount so that we could get some help. Big group of parents. I think they might be called middle class. I don't know. What do you think? That group of parents was left high and dry. What we did, well, I'm sad to say we refinanced our home maybe 3 times to provide services for my daughter, at the tune of probably $50,000 a year. I had 20 hours a week in my home. Best practice therapies recommend 40 hours. I could only do half. But let me tell you what a difference it made. My daughter's at University of Oregon, meaning that she can walk to class, be able to attend like any other student, like any other child. We want my dreams for my child that were ripped apart that day of that diagnosis have been implemented through Bridgeway House and other programs like this so that she could be part of the community, and my dream is still intact for her. It just took a really different route. So with those changes, with my program, the home therapy program, and this is why I say this is an important program, because this is the heart and soul of what we do. I started working with a physician in town, a developmental physician in town, and she taught me therapies, a therapy that I could use on my child and teach my older children and my husband. And we took shifts in our home to fill those 40 hours. We learned how to do it. I thought after 3 children that I knew all about love, and I knew all about getting on the floor and playing, but I really knew nothing. My work had just begun. When you play with goals and intention. If that child looks at you in the eye, you reached a goal. If it even get the slightest response from a nonverbal child, you reached a goal. You reached a skill that you want to keep going. This is an important thing that all families do. So when my daughter got diagnosed at 2 years old, I was sent home with that pamphlet that we've all heard about. She might have to be institutionalized. It's the physician's job to give you worst case scenario. I didn't know it then. I know it now. The worst case scenario is always presented. But each mom who's in crisis, or dad, gets that diagnosis after 5 hours of evaluations with an OT, speech, developmental pediatrician, social worker. You go home with a diagnosis of possible high-functioning autism, borderline mental ability. What does that mean? Hence my topic, what is autism? What does it mean? Possible. Does that mean she doesn't have it? Does that mean it's going to get better? Nobody had the answers for me. Again, going to conferences. I met Temple Grandin. I went all over. I did everything I could to find out information. And even at that time, 20 years ago, I had to buy a computer. I wasn't real literate on a computer then. So we could find out different information. My daughter did have language emerging, which was a really good sign. But nobody gave me hope. I would ask, is she going to have functional language? She did a lot of echolalia, which is repeating. Too many balls, too many balls, too many balls, too many balls. When I first really suspected autism, I was bringing her around to go back to my old job. My leave was gone of my work. And I'm there, and walking around, and I opened a closet in the nursery, and balls came out. And that's where she said, there's too many balls. I said, oh, too many balls. She repeated it for almost 20 minutes. I was so freaked out. I ran out of the place, put my daughter in the car seat, ran to where my husband was working, and said, oh my gosh, I think she has autism. Now, when your wife comes to you, you're not supposed to say yes, right? You're supposed to say, oh, honey, it's okay. Because that's what I expected my husband to say. No, no, honey. He said, I've been wondering that too. So there we go, that process. Again, that grueling process that I am so grateful for. At that time, it was grueling. I was angry. I was grieving. It's a loss. The loss of the dreams for what you think your child is going to be. It was like she died. And then my 16-year-old son came to me when I was crying and upset, and he said, hey, Mom, she's still the same person she was yesterday before you had this diagnosis. And I said, yeah, you're right. She is. We went there. We all decided as a family we were going to take a different route. Did I tell you my daughter's at University of Oregon? I'm proud. I'm really proud. I lost my house. In this process, I lost my husband. He died in an accident, and over time, I thought, was he up so late that night helping my daughter with autism because we took shifts? Is that the reason he was so tired and fell? I'll never know. But what I do know is that he would be I do know he is really happy where we are, that she is at the University of Oregon. She still might bag groceries, but she's at the University of Oregon right now. Going forward, we built a home program from my children learning how to do this, my older children. In came EC Cares, and they agreed that they would do a home program. There were only 2 moms at that time, and they actually didn't continue it after us. I don't know why. But there were only 2 moms at that time that we were able to get this service where EC Cares came into our house for 20 hours a week and provided services. So autism is lifelong. EC Cares goes till they're 5. What happens after they're 5? Any ideas? I didn't know either. All I know, it's lifelong, and she wasn't done. Her autism wasn't over when she was entering kindergarten. I wanted to continue that program, so I funded it ourselves. One of the doctors in town liked what we were doing, and she started sending other parents over as diagnoses were climbing. I think when she got diagnosed, it was 1 out of 26, but I'm not sure. I've been through so many numbers. It was climbing then. She was at the cusp of the peak at that point. So there were a few mothers, a group before me, but maybe you've heard of them because they were quite political, Mothers from Hell. And they were disbanded, but they were kind enough to meet with me and let me know about their work in advocacy. Of course, once these parents started coming to my home to observe the program, and my job was to start helping them. So this doctor and I made a deal. She would teach me these therapies. Twice a week, I'd spend with her. The deal was I would pay it forward. I feel like I kind of paid off my debt, but we played it forward by having these parents come and observe. The parents then, by the time I decided that I needed to take it out of my home, we had a music group, therapy group going in my home, and my daughter was hiding under the table when I had about 8 other families in there. And I thought, this isn't working, this isn't the purpose. I need to take this out of my home. So I called all the families, and not realizing that had been 35 families that had visited my home when I looked at the list, and invited them to a meeting. and asked them if they would be interested in starting a nonprofit so we can offer this work to anybody else. I had no idea what a nonprofit was. I do now. If someone asked me to start one now, I think I would possibly say no thank you. It's a lot of work. It's a 24/7 passion, enough with my child, but enough with everybody's child. When I meet with a new client, their newly diagnosed child, I relive it. I feel it. I care. There are so many families out there now in Lane County that are receiving services because of Bridgeway House that wouldn't be. Some of the other things that we did very much in the beginning, we did a lot of trips up to Salem. Again, pre-Affordable Care Act, there wasn't a lot available. There was the Combat, I don't know if you're familiar with the Combat Autism Act. It never really, we were so excited as parents, it never really materialized into anything that helped us. A lot of the things that we're putting in place are helping future children. Not necessarily my child, but helping future children and parents that are facing that diagnosis. Because it does feel like a death sentence, but Bridgeway's mission is to give you hope. It doesn't have to be. Therapies help. They really do. When my daughter was young, I couldn't take her anywhere. She choked up till high school. She still had a one-on-one aide. She was still hitting, still having these intense behaviors that really didn't have, I couldn't control. Now, today, with the 80 students in the school, I see the most heart-wrenching situations. I think it's important for a community to be aware that these families, when you see a parent out there in the grocery store and the child, you think, what a little brat. Because I have sat there when people have said, what a little brat, referring to my child. And they have no idea what's going on in that child's head. The lights, which is sensory, stimulation, noise, that all affects a child's behaviors. Autism really affects the behaviors. It's kind of, since it's a neurological disorder, it's not a visible disability. It's misread many times for our children. I can't tell you, my daughter has tics and stims. Along with her, she has Tourette's, which is very common with autism. So if you see a child going like this, how many of you have seen people go like this? Pretty common symptom of autism, characteristic, I should say. People still make comments. This is part of autism. Sensory overloads, overstimulated, not stimulated enough. Sensory processing, communication, how we communicate. So, somebody's going to have to tell me when I'm close to that 20 minutes, because I could talk for all day. Okay, so one more quick story. To give you an idea of processing communication, it's expressive language, not that a child could have phenomenal expressive language, like my daughter does. But the receptive language is not always the same, meaning you're not processing it or understanding or not being able to say it. So a question could be a huge demand. It's very common for us to say, hey, how are you? How was your day? And we are all socially all on autopilot. It was fine. Oh, it's okay. But you ask a child with autism, how was your day? That's a very big, overwhelming question because they're very literal about that question. And it could take them weeks to answer it. So be careful how you get that information. Most likely, it would overstimulate them, overload them processing, and not be able to answer it in a way that would be socially acceptable. Also, autism affects communication, which I just said, and social abilities. Often children with autism are very, very inappropriate socially. They'll say things, they embarrass you. As parents, they will often say something very inappropriate, rude, and it could be very literal and miscommunicated and taken the wrong way, offending people, not understanding what those child's needs are. And that's because they have a communication. Part of their autism is communication, and they cannot communicate in the same way that we do. They used to say autism is very much like a Mac versus a PC. They both do the same thing, they operate differently. So I'm going to go back to my story about processing. When my daughter was young, of course, I tried every outside odd weirdo therapy with I think the one thing we didn't do was swim with the dolphins, which I hear is very therapeutic, but we tried all sorts of things between diet. We did what you call the Dan protocol. We went to traveled to different locations to try different therapies. Basically, we spent a lot of money that we didn't have, and I'm still very grateful for it. We used to give my daughter vitamin therapy, trying to take a lot of blood tests and finding out where her deficits are and help with treating her with vitamins and supplements. So they had a lot of different things that I'd never heard of that work on attention and awareness. Some things for calming, how we would use them. So we probably had about 7 or 8. We'd put in a little we call it the vitamin jar, the vitamin bowl. So every morning, Jofika would get her vitamin bowls in her little vitamin bowl, and she would just take them like clockwork. I love pottery. So we were at a pottery show one time, and I found the cutest little bowl. And I thought, oh, wouldn't this be cute for Jofika's vitamin bowl? Never thought 2 seconds more about it. I bought it. Next day, I placed the vitamins in there. No problem. She took them. And then as time went by, she started not taking them. And I could figure out why. This is the easiest thing. We're part of a program. We do the same thing every single day, same time. She didn't take her vitamins. Then she started screaming. And my husband and I were beside ourselves. She needs to take these vitamins. It's going to make her not have autism anymore, right? At one point, I sat on her and made her take the vitamins. I left crying and kind of beside myself what to do next. That evening, we're in the bathtub. I'm washing her, and I can't asking questions is not really, so they're not real direct. So if I said, why aren't you taking your vitamins? Which I did, because I didn't realize I wasn't supposed to ask questions very much. Then I learned the hard way. There was a long silence. Where's my vitamin bowl? This is 6 months after I changed the vitamin bowl. And immediately, my light bulb went on. And I said, are you not taking your vitamins because I switched the bowls? Where's my vitamin bowl? That was my response. The next morning, I put the old vitamin bowl out there. She's almost 22. I'm using the same vitamin bowl today. I'm not changing it ever again because she's much bigger than I am. I can't sit on her anymore. So that is kind of a real window into the rigidness and the processing. She knew all along what the problem was, but she couldn't communicate with me, even though she can speak so elegantly and so well. It has such a handle on the literalness of the English language. She's brilliant. At 3 years old, she knew every bone in the human body in Latin. She's still brilliant, but can she tie her shoe? No. Do I have to comb her hair every morning? Yeah, I do. She still cannot put her hair in a ponytail. Can she take the bus? No, not yet. We're working on it. It's all emerging. Autism is a developmental disorder, meaning that it's uneven. So some kids are going to be absolutely brilliant in one area and deficits in the other. So it's very obvious that hers are in adaptive skills, adaptive life skills. They're not into the intellect. So she can read and determine these things. So you can see by 3 why we called her Patella, from her interest at that time. So that's how it can affect the communication. It's much more complicated than saying they just can't talk, because they can. Often, many of these children can talk. Some are severely impacted and will need care 24/7 the rest of their lives. At our school, some of them need 2-on-1, meaning 2 adults on one all the time because of their behaviors. The really wonderful thing about therapies and our program at Bridgeway House is, again, since the Affordable Care Act, I'm going to keep bringing that up, it has allowed insurance companies to pay for behavioral health. So some families are able to use their benefits, and even OHP and Trillium now can pay for that. So they can get help. Doesn't matter how much money you have, they get help. We'll take other insurances. The other part of the program is total scholarships. So we have a lot of events coming up, which I'd love to share with you too, of ways we raise money. But all the monies that we receive and grants that we receive go specifically to the scholarship program to make sure that we never have to turn a child or a family away for income or insurance or anything. So if you came and you didn't have any money, yes, there's a process to go through. Financial process, there's not a wait list. However, the rest of the process there is, like any organization. One of the things the group of parents and I just in the very beginning said, they'll never have to wait. We will never do those things. Very much like when you have your mother and your father and you say, oh, we'll never do that. Well, guess what? There's a reason. You grow up, and as the agency grows up, you know, oh, there's a reason why we have a wait list. We really didn't want to do that, but we do. With the school, we have 35 children privately placed on the wait list, and each district has their own wait list to get in. The goal of the school is not to grow too large, because then we defeat our purpose of having large numbers and having too much stimulus for those children. And also the one-on-one that they need with therapies. So the therapy I keep talking about is applied behavior analysis. It is the best practice therapy. There are multiple other therapies that are really good as well that help generalize children to be able to be in our community. But these therapies are used in every program that we do, not just home program, but the school and our social groups. Behavior therapy is a big piece of autism. I'd really like to stop and see if there's questions, because I don't want to be talking at you so you get bored with my story. Are there any questions that I can answer?
There's a microphone over here too, as well as here. So if you have questions for Patricia, come up to the microphone, because she's holding the porter. That way she can still walk around. I'd say we're all very glad that you're such a fierce advocate, and we're very grateful that you are here today.
Thank you.
You spoke to developmental disorders. Is that different than developmental delays in identification of a disability?
Well, a developmental disorder is the official term or diagnosis for autism is that it's a lifelong neurological disorder. So that's where the disorder comes from, is the definition of what autism, the diagnosis is, versus a lot of terminology of language is not used anymore for political correctness. So we don't use mental retardation or any of those kind of terminologies. So it's a lifelong disorder. And that's, people with autism can be very offended by the word disability. So we did change our mission statement to say, of all abilities, because still I would say my daughter still tells me I don't have autism. And developmental delays, in terms of that question, that is what autism, that's part of the characteristics of autism. And I probably wasn't very clear with that, but processing, communication, developmental delays, social skills, those are the main characteristics of autism.
Okay, and then I had one other you referred to at 5 years old, what happens when they hit kindergarten in their programming, and with children with autism and how they're identified, do they have to go through another they have to be re-identified as a student who receives services. Is that true? Or do they just go? My experience in Alaska has been that they enter kindergarten unassisted and unsupported. And so that would be my question.
Really great question. So in early childhood, they what EC Cares does, which I don't know if every community has an EC Cares. They really are phenomenal. They work with the school districts, so they put them on IFSPs, which is individual family service plan, meaning that they're under 5, they're preschool aged, and they have some sort of disability or need to have services. That IFSP will follow them to school, and it will become an IEP. Often they do start in, now it's changed a little bit, they will start in with more services in place with that IFSP. So, but it's a drop. It's a drop because early intervention will come to your home. They do parent trainings. They will do therapeutic work with your child in the home. So it's a big holding. The big key word there is family. They take the family out. They're holding you. And there's a lot of places where there's transitions for kids with disabilities and disorders that there's big holes and gaps. And that's any transition. And each transition, I have to say, gets harder on the child, more expectations, and harder on the family. So kindergarten is one of those transitions. Of course, middle school, high school, transition to adulthood, and then beyond. It doesn't end. But so in the school districts, if your child was private and you didn't have them in EC Cares, say they're borderline autism or they aren't on the spectrum deep enough to get help, they're not impacted enough, they got fallen in the cracks, then when they come into school, they're more likely to be able, they'll do more diagnosing, and then they have what they call an IEP, which is, again, they have an educational diagnosis. So for my child, not only does she have to have a medical diagnosis, she had to have an educational diagnosis. And here's the funny part of it all. They say that autism is a lifelong disability. That's the medical diagnosis. But you know what? Every transition, you have to check. Every 3 years, you have to check and make sure that child still qualifies for services, that they still have autism. So we spend all those dollars on re-evaluating our children to make they sure have autism. So right now, my daughter's turning 22, and guess what? I just went through the process. We need to make sure she has autism, and that she's impacted enough with her autism to still receive any kind of services. That's what they do.
Thank you. Obviously, you've had a real challenge being a parent, and my kids were very easy. My question, though, you talked about being 22. What happens to these individuals when they're 42 and their parents can no longer do what you're doing?
Well, hopefully, and this is, again, I know political, what I'm so grateful to talking to you about here is that the advocacy for money for families, for people, adults, and children with disabilities needs to be advocated for at high levels. The funding is being threatened, obviously. I was fortunate enough to get my daughter. Everything is a lot of paperwork and hard to navigate for any family, but it's necessary. And I am so grateful it's there. So when I'm talking here, I am not complaining. I am grateful. I hope they don't take it away. What happens, this funding, DDS, Developmental Disabilities, through all this was given through Affordable Care Act, was the money has come down from the government to help care for the transition of not just the young children, but the older children into adulthood. There's so many great things that are popping up right now to offer them jobs and teaching them resumes, teaching how to write the resumes, more than just, or being able to go to college and still being able to provide that support. The SSI used to be based on parents' income. It still is for the younger children, but as they get older, they're eligible for Social Security themselves, which will help them live, so it's not so cost. And different programs help these all, not just autism, but all adults living with disabilities, help them be able to live. Is their life, $1,000, $600 a month? That no one can live on that. Hopefully, families set up programs or support care, and a lot of families can't do that, I know. I've already got my wishes for my daughter if something were to happen to me when she reaches adulthood. Right now, I'm planning that she needs lifeline support. Not much, but needs it. So whoever, say I were to die and one of my other children stepped in, because of developmental disabilities and that funding coming down from the government, they can still support her in a way that is not impoverished and she's on the street. There's a lot of people on the street that probably have some disability right now, and it's deeply sad. And so many parents with children with autism, their worst nightmare is that's going to be their child down there pushing the grocery cart. So.
I don't know if you know much about this, but I'm hoping you do. Is there any good research going on about what causes it? And is it, in fact, increasing in the population, or is that just too complicated to answer?
It is complicated, but yes, as far as research, for those that don't know, there's several organizations worldwide that do a lot of research. What they do know is that there is a genetic component. It's not necessarily vaccines or all the things you hear about. It changes every few years what they think it is. But they now, the last I read, that they think it's genetic. And I did hear it follows through the male. I don't know if it's true. I don't have the answer. But there's many organizations that are just based on research. Autism Research Center in San Diego is phenomenal what they do. And just doing research on autism. What is that? What's the name of that light up blue? Autism Speaks, thank you. Autism Speaks is based in California, I think, or New York, and they're worldwide. It's why you see on April 2nd every year things lit up blue. All they do is research. So people give their, I know a woman in our organization, her child with autism died, so she donated the brain to Autism Speaks. And they are researching to find out the causes of autism. So, but they do think it's genetic, and sometimes it's just a change in your population too. It could be environmental, it could be a combination of things, but nobody really knows at this point.
Okay, it made me a little uncomfortable when you said it's not necessarily vaccines, because my understanding is it's not vaccines. Yeah, that's scary when you...
Well, I mean, personally for me, I'm not 100% sure that it doesn't have anything to do with that.
I am.
I'm sure. I'm just not. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a researcher, so it's not my place to say. Okay. I accept that people may think it is. It's very common with regressive autism for children to regress around 15 months, so it can very well look like it's linked to vaccines, but it doesn't necessarily. For only regressive autism, and that regressive autism meaning they're developing all the way till that point. Many children unvaccinated have autism. Okay. So there's no proof for that.
Yeah.
I acknowledge that some parents think that it has something to do with it.
Right, but they don't know. They're not scientists. Could you also speak to Asperger's a little bit? I had a boss who was incredibly intelligent, but definitely had social issues, and I always wondered if he might have Asperger's.
Okay, Asperger's is pretty much what my daughter has. When they used to diagnose with high-functioning autism, they changed how they diagnosed it. So it used to be autism and Asperger's. Asperger's is supposedly a higher functioning of autism, where people can go to university, get jobs, and they just seem odd to you, but they have certain ways of being, and they wear the same clothes, the same shoes all the time, and do the same thing, and they're very particular. Often they do have Asperger's. And this again is why the numbers are so high. They have made that one spectrum now. It's called ASD. So there's no longer, technically, the word Asperger's is no longer a diagnosis in itself. It's under ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder. So they take those numbers there. So when they do research, they don't, that's one of those split things. People were upset that they stopped diagnosing people specifically with Asperger's. But it's no longer a diagnosis, I guess.
Well, along that same line, at the beginning you said you included schizophrenia and bipolar. Are those really in the autism spectrum?
They're the comorbid diagnosis that can accompany autism. So that spectrum is very big. So I'll give you an example. At our school, we have a little boy who's deaf, and he has autism. They couldn't serve him at the deaf school in Salem at the time because of his autism. So what diagnosis comes first? That's what I would think, but autism came first. He's at our school, and we hired a sign language specialist to help him. So people with autism have comorbid diagnosis, their company. So I could have someone at our school that has schizophrenia or bipolar, but the autism becomes the first diagnosis or what they serve. It's really sad because sometimes when they're serving students on IEPs, they have to list the primary diagnosis. I would have thought deaf too, but I've met plenty of at least 3 or 4 different families that have had a child that's deaf and has autism, and they don't necessarily take the deafness first, it's the autism.
Hi.
Hi.
So as a community member, when we see a family and we look at the child and we say, oh, what a brat, what would you ask of us as community members? How would you have us participate in that situation to support the parent and the child?
It's a wonderful question, too. First, it's a very hard thing to not judge people. We do it all the time without even knowing it. I would first not judge, if you could just kind of... I know from my children, my older children, they always know something else could be going on now because they've lived with it. So I don't presume when I see that child behaving that way. Sometimes if a mother is really having a hard time, even asking, don't interact with a child, I would say is the first thing. But ask the mother, can I do anything? Can I help? Could I hold that? But often not judging is the biggest thing. We used to hand out, we still have the cards, people staring, making judgments. Don't stare. Please. You know, anybody, if you ran into somebody that had CP and they were in the chair, are you going to sit there and stare? Most likely, your social skills are going to tell you not. It's uncomfortable to engage with somebody like that, right? Engage, be comfortable, don't judge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? I want to thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
I would love to invite you to participate in a couple of community awareness events. One, April 14th, we have our annual auction, and it's at the Autism Club by Autism Stadium. We do light the O up blue. I invite you to go online and see if you can sign up. We'd love to have you there. And then on our race, which is 27th? April 22nd. This one is close to me. It's a Richard Wigney Memorial Autism Run. This is a really wonderful time to engage in families with children with autism. The kids run and they walk and they're coming wagons, and it's also a race, so there are racers there, but it's such a blended time for our community to be out there. You're not just giving money, you're out there supporting them and talking with them while you're on this 3 or 5 mile course. You can walk, you can bring your dog. It's a wonderful thing to do. It's a wonderful family event. And just by coming, you're supporting families with autism. So please come. And then on April 27th at the Holt Center, we have a play that we give every year, a production. It's funded by different grants. Our entire cast has autism. And what a wonderful gift to give self-esteem and fill that theater for them. So please, if you have the time, come. Thank you.